The president, as commander-in-chief, could do what was necessary for the nation's security, even discriminate on the basis of race.
You have to remember, at the time of Korematsu, Brown versus Board of Education hasn't yet been decided. Segregation is still the law of the land.
The Supreme Court handed down one of its most controversial decisions on December 18, 1944.
The Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that President Roosevelt's order was constitutional.
The court said that this is time of war, and in time of war, it is necessary to do things that might not be permissible in time of peace.
Justice Hugo Black, who later became known as one of the court's great champions of civil liberties and equal rights, wrote the majority decision that accepted the government's argument of military necessity.
Imagine that you're a judge. Suppose you don't believe the military, but you might possibly be wrong. And if you're wrong, what will happen if you actually shut down a government policy, a security policy, and then there's another attack?
You think some judge knows as much as General Eisenhower? So of course we must give great deference to officials who tell us we have a problem, we know the situation, and we need you to understand that.
For Justice Black, deference to the military while at war was more important than the racial nature of the internment. He wrote that Korematsu was not excluded from the military area because of hostility to him or his race. He was excluded because the country was at war with the Japanese Empire.
Other justices certainly didn't see it that way. Justice Frank Murphy, for the very first time ever in a Supreme Court opinion, used the word racism. The United States government in this order was targeting Japanese Americans. It wasn't looking at other minority groups that the country also was at war against, Italians, Germans, only the Japanese. And to Justice Murphy, that clearly showed that that order was racist.
Murphy also said that he couldn't see any military necessity for this order.
Justice Murphy also insisted that there was no evidence to justify the president's internment order, and that the majority decision in this case would allow the president to act outside the law.
Murphy made a powerful dissent. Presidents must be reminded that they too are subject to the law, and the law must insist. The law must always be obeyed. Once we depart from that rule, there's no stopping.
It is a dangerous thing to tell the president he can ignore the law, or to expect him to, or to put him in the position of his having to do so to save the country.
Also dissenting was Justice Roberts, the same Justice Roberts whose Pearl Harbor report created so much hysteria about Japanese spies on the mainland. By 1944, he no longer believed the military.
Justice Roberts says that we have to be very skeptical about the claims of the government in these circumstances, and we have to hold the government to a very high standard of justification. And one has to wonder whether Roberts didn't want to make the same mistake a second time.
The third dissent was written by Justice Robert Jackson.
Justice Jackson actually referred to the precedent that the majority was creating as a loaded weapon.
And he said, if we uphold that, well, that precedent will stand like a loaded gun, ready to be picked up by someone in the future who will use it to justify who knows what.
He thought it meant that the courts and the rule of law were being eroded during wartime.
The decision came near the end of the war. Germany surrendered about 6 months later, and the United States had turned back the Japanese in the Pacific, making a Japanese invasion of the West Coast unthinkable.
The tides of war had changed much more favorably to the United States by the time the Korematsu case came down.
A month after the Korematsu decision, the camps officially began to close. Going home was the next challenge.
They felt that they would be greeted with hostile neighbors and so forth. And word also came back that many of their farms had in fact been destroyed, torched by people.
For all the fear of sabotage that led to internment, by the end of World War II, not a single person of Japanese ancestry in the United States had even been accused of sabotage. Fred Korematsu waited 40 years before he got the chance to clear his name. He joined up with a team of young lawyers led by Dale Manami.
Courts must be allowed to function even during times of crises, and should not be subjugated to the will of an arbitrary military decision maker.
We wanted a declaration from the courts that what Japanese Americans did was not wrong, it was not espionage, it was not sabotage, they were not traitors.
Normally, once the Supreme Court decides a case, that's it. The case is closed. But Minami and his team brought the Korematsu case back to federal court under a motion that is rarely used and almost never successful: coram nobis.
Coram nobis is a way that someone can go into court after they've been convicted and serve their sentence and challenge it to say, this was wrong. The facts were wrong, and this court has a duty to correct it.
A legal historian named Peter Irons had discovered documents proving that government lawyers had hidden evidence from the Supreme Court. On November 10, 1983, the U.S. District Court agreed. Fred Korematsu's conviction was vacated. It was thrown out.
I had to do some real deep thinking in order to reopen this case again, and I am very happy that I did, because this is not only for just the Japanese American citizens, but it's for all American citizens.
In 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act, which not only apologized for the internment, but paid each survivor of the camps $20,000. The act was signed by President Ronald Reagan and sponsored by Congressman Norman Mineta. That's him